20 old celebrity scandals that were swept under the rug. Behind the glitz and glamour of old Hollywood lay secrets darker than anything depicted on the silver screen. While today's celebrity scandals unfold in real time across social media, the golden age of Hollywood operated under a different system, one where powerful studio fixers, complicit media outlets, and a code of silence kept the industry's most shocking incidents hidden from public view. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 20 celebrity scandals that powerful interests managed to sweep under the rug until now. These aren't just tales of indiscretion or bad behavior. They're stories of crimes covered up, careers strategically protected, and victims silenced, all to preserve the carefully crafted illusions that studios sold to the American public. In an era when a star's image was considered studio property, executives would stop at nothing to protect their investments, using tactics that ranged from simple payoffs to alleged connections with organized crime. 1. Joan Crawford's pornographic past. Before she became one of MGM's most bankable stars and an eventual Academy Award winner, Joan Crawford was a struggling actress willing to take any job to survive in Hollywood. This reportedly included appearing in at least one pornographic film in the early 1920s, when she was likely still a teenager. As Crawford's star rose, the existence of this film became a ticking time bomb that threatened to destroy the glamorous image MGM had carefully crafted for her. According to Hollywood lore, when MGM discovered the film's existence, studio fixer Eddie Mannix was dispatched to handle the situation with extreme measures. Some accounts claim that MGM paid hundreds of thousands of dollars, an astronomical sum at the time, to track down and destroy every copy of the film, allegedly titled Velvet Lips. More sensational versions of the story suggest that Mannix enlisted mob connections to threaten or eliminate anyone attempting to distribute or profit from the footage. Crawford's own brother reportedly attempted to blackmail her over the film, approaching her first husband Douglas Fairbanks Jr. for a payoff. The blackmail attempts followed Crawford throughout her early career, even reportedly occurring during her honeymoon. Fairbanks later confirmed that his wife had indeed been blackmailed over films from her past, lending credibility to the long-circulating rumors. 2. Clark Gable's secret child. Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, embodied masculine charm and integrity in films like Gone with the Wind and It Happened One Night. But in 1935, while filming The Call of the Wild with actress Loretta Young, the married Gable engaged in a brief affair that would lead to one of Hollywood's most elaborate cover-ups. Young, a devout Catholic, discovered she was pregnant with Gable's child after filming concluded. Faced with the prospect of career-ending scandal, both for her out-of-wedlock pregnancy and for Gable's adultery, Young orchestrated an extraordinary deception with the help of studio publicists. She disappeared from public view, secretly gave birth to a daughter, placed the child in an orphanage, and then, in a bizarre twist, adopted her own biological daughter months later, presenting the girl to the press as Judy Lewis, her newly adopted child. The ruse was maintained for decades, with Young never acknowledging the truth to her daughter or the public. Lewis grew up suspecting something was amiss, particularly as she developed protruding ears identical to Gable's, a feature Young forced her to hide with bonnets and eventually painful cosmetic surgery. It wasn't until 1994, when Lewis was 59 years old, that Young finally admitted the truth to her daughter during a confrontation over a published biography. Most disturbing about this scandal was Young's later revelation that her encounter with Gable may not have been consensual. In a posthumously published memoir, Young described using the term date assault after hearing the phrase decades later, suggesting that what Hollywood had romanticized as an affair may have actually been a sexual assault, adding another layer to a scandal that had already robbed a child of her true identity for over half a century. 3. Judy Garland's studio abuse. Behind Judy Garland's iconic performances in The Wizard of Oz and other MGM classics lay a horrific story of studio abuse that was concealed for decades. From the moment the teenager signed with MGM, studio executives began a campaign of psychological and pharmaceutical manipulation that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Louis B. Mayer and other MGM officials regularly referred to the young Garland as "my little hunchback" and criticized her weight and appearance, fostering profound insecurities in the teenage star. To control her weight and maintain the punishing schedule of back-to-back film productions, the studio introduced Garland to a regimen of amphetamines to suppress her appetite and provide energy, followed by barbiturates to help her sleep, beginning a cycle of addiction that would ultimately contribute to her premature death at age 47. The studio's control extended beyond Garland's body to her personal relationships. MGM arranged dates for publicity purposes, monitored her movements, and effectively robbed her of a normal adolescence. When she became pregnant by her first husband at age 19, the studio arranged an illegal abortion to avoid interfering with film schedules and protect her girl-next-door image. Perhaps most disturbing were the allegations allegations of sexual harassment Garland faced from studio executives, including Mayer himself, who allegedly groped the young actress while telling her she sang from the heart. These traumatic experiences were systematically hidden from public view, with the studio's publicity department crafting stories about Garland's perfect life and supportive studio family. The truth about Garland's treatment emerged only gradually after her departure from MGM, with the full extent of the abuse becoming clear only after her death. By then, the damage had been done. Garland spent her adult life battling the addictions and psychological trauma inflicted during those formative years at MGM, all while the studio's carefully constructed narrative of a happy, wholesome star continued to shape public perception for decades. 4. The mysterious death of George Reeves. On June 16, 1959, George Reeves, beloved by a generation of children as Superman in the hit television series Adventures of Superman, was found dead from a gunshot wound in his Beverly Hills home. The official ruling was self-harm, but circumstances surrounding his death were suspicious enough to fuel decades of conspiracy theories and speculation about murder. The most glaring inconsistencies in the self-harm narrative included the absence of gunpowder residue on Reeves's hands, the odd angle of the fatal shot, and multiple bullet holes found in the floor of his bedroom, suggesting that more than one shot had been fired. Perhaps most suspiciously, the guests present at his house that night waited 30 to 45 minutes before calling police after hearing the gunshot, providing ample time to alter the scene. Reeves had been involved in a complicated love triangle that provided potential motives for murder. He had recently ended a long-term relationship with Toni Mannix, wife of MGM fixer Eddie Mannix, to become engaged to socialite Leonore Lemon. Some theories suggest that the jilted Toni Mannix, or her husband using his mob connections, may have arranged Reeves's murder in retaliation. The hasty conclusion of self-harm also conveniently aligned with studio interests. Reeves had been struggling with typecasting as Superman and had faced career frustration, making self-harm a plausible narrative that required no further investigation. Hollywood power players had every reason to avoid a scandalous murder investigation involving one of television's most recognizable faces, especially one that might implicate industry insiders. The case was closed quickly, with minimal investigation into the inconsistencies or the potential involvement of Hollywood's power elite. Decades later, the circumstances surrounding Reeves's death remain one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries, a case where the official story seems designed to protect powerful interests rather than uncover the truth. 5. The disturbing preferences of Charlie Chaplin. Charlie Chaplin remains one of cinema's most celebrated figures, remembered for his iconic Little Tramp character and his contributions to film as an art form. Yet behind Chaplin's genius lay a disturbing pattern of relationships with underage girls, a pattern that was an open secret in Hollywood, but carefully managed in the press and eventually mostly erased from his legacy. Chaplin had a documented preference for extremely young women, with several of his relationships beginning when the girls were between 12 and 16 years old. When he was 29, he impregnated 16-year-old actress Mildred Harris, whom he married to avoid scandal. After their divorce, the 35-year-old Chaplin began a relationship with 15-year-old Lita Gray during the filming of The Gold Rush. When Gray became pregnant at 16, Chaplin again married to avoid criminal charges for statutory assault. Their subsequent divorce revealed disturbing details about Chaplin's behavior. Gray's complaint described revolting, degrading, and offensive sexual demands, with Chaplin allegedly telling her that all married people do these things to manipulate the inexperienced teenager. The settlement awarded Gray $825,000, an enormous sum at the time that indicated the studio's desire to make the scandal disappear quickly. The pattern continued with Chaplin's infatuation with 15-year-old actress Paulette Goddard, whom he may have married when she was 17 or 18, and culminated with his final marriage to 18-year-old Una O'Neill when Chaplin was 54. While this last relationship developed into a lasting marriage, it followed the same disturbing pattern of attraction to very young women. What's most revealing about Hollywood's treatment of Chaplin's behavior is how it was reframed as romantic rather than predatory. Studio publicity portrayed him as a love-struck artist rather than a middle-aged man pursuing children, and the press largely adopted this narrative. The full details of Chaplin's relationships with underage girls were buried for decades, allowing his artistic legacy to flourish without the taint of his personal conduct, a perfect example of how powerful men's predatory behavior could be normalized and excused in old Hollywood. 6. The studio-mandated abortions. In Hollywood's golden age, female stars' reproductive choices were often dictated not by personal preference but by studio contracts. Pregnancy meant a hiatus from filming, potential changes in appearance, and a possible shift in public image. All unacceptable to studio executives who viewed actresses as investments that needed to yield constant returns. The solution was a system of forced abortions that remained one of the industry's most closely guarded secrets for decades. Actresses like Jean Harlow, Judy Garland, Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, and Lana Turner were reportedly pressured or forced into having abortions to maintain their careers. The contracts that enabled this control were astonishingly intrusive by modern standards. MGM's agreements reportedly contained explicit morality clauses that gave the studio the right to terminate a star's contract for pregnancy, and some even included provisions giving studios the right to decide when or whether their actresses could marry or have children. Most of the actresses affected never spoke publicly about their experiences during their lifetimes, with details emerging only through posthumously published memoirs or historical research. The full extent of the practice, how many women were affected and under what circumstances, remains unknowable due to the secrecy that surrounded it. 7. Wallace Reid's studio-fueled addiction. In the early 1920s, Wallace Reid was one of Hollywood's biggest stars, a handsome leading man known as the screen's most perfect lover. But Reid's tragic decline and death in 1923 revealed one of the industry's darkest practices: the use of drugs to keep stars working through injury and exhaustion. Reid's downfall began during the filming of The Valley of the Giants in 1919, when he suffered a serious injury in a train accident. Rather than allowing the valuable star time to recover properly, Paramount executives and doctors supplied him with morphine so he could continue working through excruciating pain. What began as a studio-sanctioned treatment quickly developed into a devastating addiction that the studio both enabled and concealed. As Reid's dependency worsened, his appearance and performance began to deteriorate visibly. Studio makeup artists worked overtime to conceal his declining health. Meanwhile, the studio's publicity department continued promoting him as the picture of vigor and health. By late 1922, Reid's condition had become impossible to hide. His wife, actress Dorothy Davenport, finally intervened and checked him into a sanitarium, where he died in January 1923 at just 31 years old. The official cause was listed as influenza and pneumonia, but the truth of his morphine addiction was revealed to the public, creating one of the first major drug scandals in Hollywood history. The scandal contributed to calls for movie industry regulation, ultimately helping to establish the notorious Hays Code, but the exploitative practices that had killed one of Hollywood's brightest stars. 8. The mysterious death of Thomas Ince. In November 1924, pioneering film producer Thomas Ince died suddenly at the age of 44, officially of heart failure. But the circumstances surrounding his death spawned one of Hollywood's most enduring unsolved mysteries and cover-up rumors. A case where the official explanation seemed designed to protect one of the most powerful men in America, newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. According to the carefully managed public narrative, Ince had fallen ill at home and died of heart failure exacerbated by indigestion. However, persistent rumors told a very different story, one centered on Hearst's lavish yacht party attended by various Hollywood figures, including Charlie Chaplin, gossip columnist Luella Parsons, author Eleanor Glynn, actress Marion Davies, Hearst's mistress, and allegedly Ince himself. The most sensational version of events suggests that Hearst, suspecting an affair between Chaplin and Davies, intended to shoot Chaplin but accidentally shot Ince instead. Other variations claim that Ince was shot during a confrontation or altercation aboard the yacht. Regardless of the specific scenario, these theories converge on the assertion that Hearst used his enormous influence to cover up the true circumstances of Ince's death. 9. Fatty Arbuckle and the death of Virginia Rappe. Roscoe Fatty. Arbuckle was one of silent cinema's biggest stars, both literally and figuratively, before becoming central to one of Hollywood's first major scandals. In September 1921, during a wild party in his San Francisco hotel suite, a young actress named Virginia Rappe fell seriously ill and died days later of peritonitis caused by a ruptured bladder. What followed was a sensational case that revealed how quickly studios would abandon their stars when scandal threatened the industry's reputation. Arbuckle was accused accused of assaulting Rapp and causing her injuries, with newspaper accounts, particularly those in William Randolph Hearst's publications, publishing increasingly lurid and fabricated details. The most notorious false claim was that Arbuckle had crushed her with his weight or violated her with a foreign object, causing the injuries that led to her death, but nonetheless captured the public's imagination. After 3 trials, Arbuckle was fully acquitted, with the jury taking the extraordinary step of issuing a written apology stating that acquittal is not enough for Roscoe Arbuckle. Despite his legal vindication, the damage was irreparable. The newly formed Motion Picture Producers and Distributors of America, headed by Will Hayes, banned Arbuckle from appearing on screen in an effort to salvage the industry's reputation. All his films were withdrawn from circulation, and his career was effectively destroyed overnight. The damage was done. Major studios refused to work with him, and his career never recovered. 10. Jean Harlow and the suspicious death of Paul Byrne. In 1932, Hollywood was rocked by the apparent self-inflicted death of producer Paul Byrne, found dead of a gunshot wound just 2 months after his marriage to blonde bombshell Jean Harlow. The official story, quickly established and promoted by MGM's powerful publicity machine, was that Byrne, allegedly impotent, had taken his own life out of shame over his inability to consummate the marriage, a narrative supported by a note found at the scene. But this version of events, designed to protect the studio's valuable star, almost certainly concealed a far more complicated truth. Evidence suggests that Byrne was still legally married to another woman, Dorothy Millette, who had been institutionalized for mental illness. Millette had appeared at Byrne's home the night of his death, possibly leading to a confrontation that ended in his murder rather than self-harm. Adding to the suspicion, Millette herself was found dead in the Sacramento River days after Byrne's death that conveniently eliminated a key witness. MGM fixer Eddie Mannix reportedly arrived at the scene of Byrne's death before the police, potentially altering evidence and crafting the impotence narrative to protect both Harlow's reputation and the studio's investment in her career, further undermining the official narrative. MGM's control of the story was so complete that the truth may never be known. 11. Errol Flynn's predatory behavior. Swashbuckling star. Errol Flynn embodied Hollywood adventure in films like Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, but behind his dashing screen persona lurked a predator with a documented preference for underage girls, a pattern of behavior that studios helped conceal until it became impossible to ignore. Flynn's predilection for teenagers was an open secret in Hollywood circles. He was known to use his charm and fame to target girls as young as 15, with Warner Brothers executives and publicists working to keep these relationships hidden from the public. Flynn himself reportedly once quipped, "I like my whiskey old and my women young," a disturbing joke that revealed his true character. In 1942, the studio could no longer protect Flynn when 2 underage girls, 17-year-old Betty Hansen and 16-year-old Peggy Satterlee, accused him of statutory assault in separate incidents. The subsequent trial became a media sensation, with Warner Brothers deploying all its resources to protect its valuable star. The studio hired the best defense attorneys, who employed brutal tactics to discredit the young accusers, painting them as promiscuous liars, seeking fame and fortune through false accusations. The defense team's strategy worked, and Flynn was acquitted, a verdict so controversial that it spawned the phrase "in like Flynn" to describe getting away with something. According to one of his accusers, the jury just sat and looked adoringly at him as if he was their son or something, highlighting how celebrity could override evidence in the public mind. What makes this case particularly disturbing is that Flynn's acquittal emboldened rather than chastened him. After the trial, he openly dated 18-year-old Nora Eddington, whom he had met at the courthouse during his trial. Years later, when he was 50, Flynn began a relationship with 15-year-old Beverly Adland, with whom he remained until his death. Despite these continuing inappropriate relationships with minors, Flynn's career and public image largely recovered from the scandal, a testament to both studio power and the public's willingness to overlook the misconduct of beloved stars. 12. The kidnapping of Mary Pickford's niece. In 1937, Hollywood was shocked by the kidnapping of Mary Pickford's 17-year-old niece, Gwen Pickford. The young woman was abducted at gunpoint and held for $200,000 ransom in what threatened to become a sensational case involving America's most beloved actress, known as America's sweetheart. But what the public didn't know was how thoroughly the subsequent events were managed and manipulated to protect the Pickford family's reputation. Mary Pickford, along with her husband Douglas Fairbanks Sr., her business partner Charlie Chaplin, and studio head Joseph Schenck, took extraordinary measures to handle the situation privately. Rather than allowing law enforcement to manage manage the case, they hired private investigators and negotiated directly with the kidnappers, eventually securing Gwyn's release for a reported $10,000, far less than the original demand. While the kidnapping itself made headlines, the aftermath was carefully controlled to minimize scandal. The young woman was whisked away from public view, and the family refused to cooperate with police efforts to capture the kidnappers. Most significantly, they suppressed information about Gwyn's treatment during captivity. Rumors suggested she had been sexually assaulted, but this was never confirmed or acknowledged publicly. 13. Tallulah Bankhead's secret life. Tallulah Bankhead was known for her husky voice, quick wit, and magnetic stage presence. But what the public didn't see was a private life so scandalous that it required constant intervention from publicists and studio fixers to maintain her viability as a star. Behind Bankhead's sophisticated public image lay a woman whose uninhibited sexuality and substance use would have shocked the audiences of her era. Bankhead was remarkably open about her bisexuality in private circles, allegedly boasting of affairs with hundreds of men and women, including claimed liaisons with Marlene Dietrich, Greta Garbo, and Hattie McDaniel. She conducted these relationships with little attempt at discretion, sometimes in semi-public places, creating a continuous challenge for those tasked with protecting her reputation. British intelligence service MI5 even allegedly investigated her for relationships with underage Eton students during her time in London. Her sexual openness was matched by her candor about her reproductive history. Bankhead acknowledged having multiple abortions by age 30 and eventually underwent a hysterectomy. In an era when women's reproductive choices were strictly controlled and deeply stigmatized, Bankhead's matter-of-fact approach to these issues represented a profound threat to conventional morality. Adding to her scandalous reputation was her well-known substance abuse. Bankhead was a heavy drinker and cocaine user who made little effort to hide her habits, once reportedly saying, "Cocaine habit forming? Of course not. I ought to know. I've been using it for years." Her parties were legendary for their excess, creating constant headaches for studio representatives assigned to manage her public image. 14. Frances Farmer's forced institutionalization. In the late 1930s, Frances Farmer was a rising Hollywood star with critically acclaimed performances in films like Come and Get It and Son of Fury. But by 1945, she had disappeared from public view, institutionalized in a Washington state psychiatric hospital where she would spend nearly 5 years subjected to treatments that would today be considered barbaric. The story studios told about her absence represented one of Hollywood's most disturbing cover-ups. Farmer's troubles began with a series of minor legal issues and public outbursts that, while relatively innocuous by today's standards, threatened her studio-crafted image. Rather than acknowledging her possible struggle with alcohol or mental health challenges, studios immediately began circulating stories painting her as morally degenerate and out of control. When her mother successfully petitioned to have her committed to a psychiatric institution in 1944, Hollywood publicists seized the opportunity to frame her institutionalization as a cautionary tale about the dangers of rebellion and nonconformity. What the public wasn't told was the horrific reality of Farmer's treatment. At Western State Hospital, she was allegedly subjected to insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive treatments, and possibly a lobotomy, though the latter remains disputed by historians. Most disturbing were later allegations that Farmer was routinely assaulted by hospital orderlies, and according to some accounts, essentially made available to soldiers from a nearby military base. While these most extreme claims lacked definitive proof, even the confirmed treatments she received were brutal by any standard. Throughout her institutionalization, studio publicity departments continued portraying Farmer's situation as a deserved punishment for a defiant woman rather than a tragedy involving possibly inappropriate medical treatment. Hollywood columnists, working closely with studios, described her as getting what she deserved, and used her as an example to warn other actresses about the consequences of challenging the system. This narrative served both as character assassination and as a warning to other performers who might consider defying studio control. When Farmer was finally released in 1950, she was a shadow of her former self. Her attempted comeback failed, and she eventually faded into obscurity, working as a hotel receptionist and making occasional television appearances. It wasn't until years after her death in 1970 that the full horror of her institutional experience began to emerge, particularly through Jessica Lange's portrayal in the 1982 film Frances and Kenneth Anger's controversial book Hollywood Babylon. The case exemplifies Hollywood's ability not just to hide inconvenient truths, but to reframe personal tragedies as morality tales that served the industry's need for compliant stars who understood the cost of defiance. 15. The self-harm of Peg Entwistle. On September 16, 1932, a young actress named Peg Entwistle climbed the maintenance ladder on the Hollywoodland sign overlooking Los Angeles and jumped to her death from the letter H. She left behind a note that read simply, "I am afraid, I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain." P.E. Entwistle's death at age 24, which ironically brought her more fame than she had achieved in life, might seem like a story Hollywood would sensationalize rather than suppress. However, in the Depression era, with the film industry already under attack for its perceived moral corruption, studios worked quickly to minimize the incident and its implications about the dark side of pursuing fame in Hollywood. RKO Pictures, where Entwistle had recently completed her only film role in 13 Women, distanced itself from the tragedy. The studio neither acknowledged her as a contract player nor offered any official statement about her death. Meanwhile, other studios pressured newspapers to downplay the story, fearing it would deter young hopefuls from coming to Hollywood, the lifeblood of the studio system that required a constant influx of new talent. The most significant aspect of the cover-up involved suppressing Entwistle's motivation. While her note didn't explicitly blame Hollywood rejection, friends later revealed that she had been devastated by RKO's decision to cut most of her scenes from 13 Women and by the studio's subsequent termination of her contract. These details, which implicated the callous studio system in her despair, were largely absent from contemporary reporting on her death. 16. Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich's secret relationship. Greta Garbo and Marlene Dietrich were two of Hollywood's most enigmatic and alluring stars, each cultivating an image of sophisticated mystery that captivated audiences worldwide. Yet one of the most carefully guarded secrets about both women was their alleged romantic relationship, a liaison that, if confirmed publicly, would have shattered the carefully constructed personas that made them international icons. Rumors of an affair between the two actresses circulated in Hollywood's inner circles for decades, with various accounts suggesting they had been lovers in Weimar-era Berlin before either achieved international fame. These stories were given weight by the women's own behavior. Both were known within private circles to have had relationships with both men and women, despite their public images as heterosexual seductresses. What makes this potential relationship particularly interesting as a cover-up was the elaborate lengths to which both women reportedly went to conceal not just their affair, but any association whatsoever. Throughout their Hollywood careers, Garbo and Dietrich maintained the fiction that they had never even met, despite working at the same studios and moving in the same social circles. When questioned about each other in interviews, both women consistently denied any acquaintance. This denial became increasingly difficult to maintain when film historians discovered that both had appeared in the 1925 German silent film The Joyless Street, definitively placing them on the same set. Yet both women continued to deny any meeting, with Dietrich once claiming she had been misidentified in the film, a claim contradicted by production records. Whether the relationship was real or rumored, the case illustrates how thoroughly stars could control their narratives when sufficiently motivated, creating denials so consistent that the truth remains elusive even decades after their deaths. 17. The mysterious disappearance of Jean Spangler. On October 7, 1949, aspiring actress Jean Spangler left her home in Los Angeles, telling her family she was meeting her ex-husband, then heading to work on a film shoot. She never returned. 2 days later, her purse was discovered in Griffith Park with a cryptic, unfinished note that read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer. Going to see Doctor. Scott, it will work best this way while Mother is away." The disappearance created an immediate sensation. Actor Kirk Douglas, who had recently worked with Spangler on the film Young Man with a Horn, publicly denied any involvement, but acknowledged having briefly met her on set. Troubling patterns emerged, suggesting a potential cover-up. Witnesses who initially came forward began changing their stories or becoming suddenly unavailable. Police leads that pointed toward Hollywood personalities were mysteriously dropped or reassigned. Most tellingly, studio executives at RKO and other companies where Spangler had worked were markedly uncooperative with investigators. The investigation's momentum stalled with suspicious speed, and within weeks the case had largely disappeared from newspaper headlines, an unusual outcome for the disappearance of a young woman connected to Hollywood, which would typically generate sustained media interest. This rapid fading from public consciousness suggested powerful forces working to minimize the story's exposure. Jean Spangler's fate represents one of Hollywood's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. 18. The Hearst-Davies-Chaplin Triangle. William Randolph Hearst, the powerful newspaper magnate and inspiration for Citizen Kane, maintained a decades-long relationship with actress Marion Davies while remaining married married to his wife, Millicent. This arrangement was an open secret in Hollywood circles, but was kept largely hidden from the general public through Hearst's control of media outlets and aggressive management of Davies' public image. The carefully maintained facade was threatened in 1924 when Hearst came to believe that Charlie Chaplin was having an affair with Davies. According to persistent Hollywood legend, this jealousy culminated during a party aboard Hearst's yacht, where he allegedly intended to shoot Chaplin but accidentally shot and killed producer Thomas Ince instead, as covered earlier in our countdown. Hearst deployed his vast media empire to protect Davies' reputation while simultaneously using it as a weapon against Chaplin. His newspapers published glowing stories about Davies while increasingly targeting Chaplin with negative coverage, particularly during his statutory assault trial. This ability to shape public narrative through media ownership represented one of the most powerful cover-up mechanisms in early Hollywood. The relationship between Hearst and Davies continued until his death in 1951, with the true nature of their private life. Davies was cast in Hearst publications as a talented, wholesome actress rather than the mistress of a married tycoon, while Hearst was portrayed as her mentor and champion rather than her possessive lover. The case demonstrates how wealth and media control could shape public perception, not just of isolated incidents, but of entire relationships and careers. 19. Rock Hudson's hidden sexuality. For decades, Rock Hudson embodied rugged American masculinity on screen, starring opposite leading ladies like Doris Day in romantic comedies that cemented his image as the quintessential heterosexual heartthrob. This carefully constructed persona made him one of Hollywood's most bankable stars of the 1950s and 1960s, and it was built entirely on deception, concealing Hudson's homosexuality from the public in one of Hollywood's longest-running and most elaborate cover-ups. Hudson's true sexuality was an open secret within the industry. His agent, Henry Wilson, specialized in managing the careers of gay actors, helping them maintain heterosexual public images while discreetly navigating Hollywood's gay subculture. For Hudson, this management included arranged dates with women for public appearances, carefully staged photo opportunities suggesting heterosexual romances, and even a sham marriage to Wilson's secretary, Phyllis Gates, that lasted just 3 years. Studio publicists routinely paid off potential sources who might reveal Hudson's secret, while friendly journalists were fed false stories about his romantic interests in various actresses. The deception continued until July 1985, when Hudson's HIV diagnosis became impossible to conceal due to his visibly deteriorating health. His admission that he was receiving treatment for AIDS effectively confirmed his homosexuality to a shocked public, many of whom had never questioned his heterosexual image. He died 3 months later, becoming the first major celebrity to die of an AIDS-related illness and inadvertently becoming the most famous face of a disease that the Reagan administration had largely ignored. 20. The MGM fixers and the hidden system. Behind every individual scandal we've discussed lay a systematic apparatus of deception and control, a network of fixers, publicists, and studio executives who functioned as Hollywood's shadow government, determining which truths could be told and which had to be buried. At the center of this system at MGM, the most powerful studio of Hollywood's golden age, were two men whose names rarely appeared in the press, but whose influence shaped the public's entire perception of the film industry: Eddie Mannix and Howard Strickling. Officially, Mannix served as a vice president and general manager, while Strickling headed the publicity department. Unofficially, they operated as the studio's cleanup crew, handling everything from suppressing stories about stars' sexual indiscretions to managing more serious issues including alleged assaults, abortions, and even deaths. The pair maintained detailed files on the private lives of MGM talent, not to blackmail them, but to better manage potential scandals before they erupted. They arranged hasty marriages when starlets became pregnant, negotiated with police to make charges disappear, and crafted elaborate cover stories for everything from drunk driving incidents to self-harm attempts. Stars themselves were often kept in the dark about how their images were being managed, creating a system where even the subjects of manipulation were unaware of its full extent. What makes the fixer system particularly notable is how thoroughly it was itself covered up. While individual scandals occasionally broke through the wall of silence, the existence of the systematic apparatus remained largely hidden from public view until decades later. Books like The Fixers and Hollywood Babylon eventually revealed aspects of how the system operated, but even these accounts likely represent only a fraction of the activities undertaken to maintain the studio's carefully constructed illusions. The legacy of Mannix, Strickling, and their counterparts at other studios extends far beyond the individual scandals they managed. They created the template for modern celebrity image management and crisis PR, a system where truth is treated as malleable and public perception as something to be engineered rather than earned. In doing so, though, they established a fundamental dishonesty at the heart of the entertainment industry that in many ways persists to this day. If you found this journey through Hollywood's hidden history enlightening, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of the stories that shaped our cultural landscape. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Which of these scandals surprised you most? Are there others you think deserved a place on our list? Or perhaps you have questions about aspects of these stories we didn't have time to cover? Until next time, remember that behind every silver screen, fantasy lies a complex reality, one that reminds us to look beyond the carefully constructed images presented to us and seek the deeper truths they often conceal. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in our next video.